systems designer, visionary, and storyteller. And today I want to talk about measuring what matters. So from the example, we can see that measurements really define our life. They inform our actions, they help us to make decisions. They really inform the way how we're thinking and how we're believing. And they really help us to make sense of an ever-increasing complex world, as many of those examples that we saw today showing. So, but yet, the piece that we are really not really capturing is how do we really feel? Well, it is the late afternoon, there's a certain amount of coffee, there's maybe a little bit anxiety about the overall grossing topics. And yet, there is my human desire and really belief in the well-being and our capacities as a human whole. And I'm also thinking about happiness. Happiness, both individual and collectively, and how different this can be defined with just those simple moments that we're really enjoying when we really just sitting in whatever space we created for ourselves and just are naturally happy. And what does really well-being mean? What does well-being really define for all of us, both individually and collectively? So if measurements define our reality and how we behave, let's think about why are we really measuring? Well, measuring is a very important piece. It really helps us to really make sense of the complexity of our world. It is there to really inform us, to really help us to make good and informed decisions. And yet, the most important pieces, those how do we really feel happy, how are we really defining our well-being, this is not really captured. And yet it's fundamental. It's an important and essential part of our reality. This is how we really make meaning, how we're relating to each other. These are the little stories that we're sharing. Facts, facts, facts. What we at the end of the day remember are those little stories. Because we come from a lineage of storytellers. Those that we gathered around the fires, the stories, that are the ones who were visionaries. If we flew to the moon, well, there's many, many visions and dreams of humankind to fly to the moon. So if we are really measuring to really make sense of these complex systems, to really tackle these wicked problems of our time, we're also measuring in order to manage our resources. So what are we measuring? Well, the number one measurement that we're all using on a day-to-day basis, I think I just paid 1,250 kronas for my lunch, is money. And money is a very important resource. It's usually measured towards growth, and it's an act of trading. The growth doesn't come without cost. It's extractive in most of the cases. And yet, while it's an important resource, it only gives us a very slim scissor of really all the resources that we have. And often if we're coming from an element of scarcity, how can we invite the well-being, the wealth that is all around us? All these resources. So if I'm looking into how do I really measure the well-being, the health of an economy, the health of a society, well, I need to take all accounts into place. So there are many different frameworks how to measure, and there's a myriad of them out, and there's no right or wrong way. So what I want to kind of introduce right now is a way how really we can capture, and this is again one of many, many frameworks, how I can capture different resources, areas of domain, dimensions, or also capitals. And the richness of each of the ecosystems or each of our social systems, they all can be measured in certain frameworks. And this framework, the meta-impact framework, gives you the possibility to identify 10 different areas of domains. And while there's probably more to add, but it's at least a good start. And how would one use a framework like this, and what would be the reason for this? Well, we heard about many research that has been done today. Several of the examples were cited today. So if you are engaging into community efforts, if you have a multi-stakeholder engagement, if you want to create an assessment of what you have, well, most of the time we're really finding ourselves in beginning with one of the areas we begin to look in. And this framework really invites a multitude of different perspectives. And so, for example, if we're taking an example of an ecosystem, well, let's use a forest, for example. So there are different stakeholders that could be part of a forest. Well, number one of the most important stakeholders that I like to define is the resource itself. If you're having a multi-stakeholder conversation, there should always be the object of discussion should have a place on the table. Because our natural resources is one of the elements that is defined here as in the lower part. There's financial resources. This is a domain that is mainly represented by those who are looking at the capital growth of a forest. The amount of acres, the productivity of a forest could be measured both in the manufacture and the financial gain. This would be the perspective of somebody who works in forestry. And then there might be the family who is coming from a long lineage of forester. So they are maybe more the stewards of the land. So they bring just another perspective to the table because they're holding the cultural and the social dimension as maybe also a very special knowledge, maybe a traditional knowledge of how to really work with the forest and being successful stewards with the forest. And then another perspective could be, for example, those who are using the forest recreational. Their value would be probably mainly driven on health and human, maybe a little bit of cultural and social too. And there's possibly maybe a little bit of a psychological and maybe even like a spiritual dimension of finding this contemplative moments in there. And all these pieces could be quantified in one way or the other. And that is very important starting data. And if you begin to look at any scenario, you will find usually a myriad of those quantitative data, if you're really including all the different perspectives. And yet there is another layer that I wanted to point to. It's the additional dimension of the personal and the interrelational piece. The one, how it makes somebody feel. And if you've ever asked somebody, well, how are you today? Well, this is a very common question, but if you really ask the forester, what is the meaning of the forest for you? If you're asking the family who comes from the lineage of forest, if you ask them a very specific question how they're feeling about something, they will come up with a knowledge that is not captured to quantitative data. So we're bringing in, and this is just an invite, I'm not saying it has to be done like this, but we're often missing the knowledge that is already there if we're just asking personal questions and making visible what and how people are feeling. And in the moment it's visible, if I'm taking a subjective experience and make it an object, not only I can see it, it becomes an asset, also others can see it and they can relate to this. It becomes a resource. So my sensing about something becomes all of a sudden part of it. And what it really does, it creates feedback loops. All of a sudden, the whole system can relate to this. And what it does, it makes me feeling good because I'm contributing to something. I'm building an engagement in this. And what this also does, it really creates connection. It connects into relationship of the stakeholders that otherwise may not talk with each other. And how is this be done? How could this possibly be achieved? Is this a dream that I'm talking about? No, we're doing it all the time. We're doing it by telling our stories. By telling the stories that we had with our families on this wonderful last time in the hike. We're sharing pictures, we're defining stories, we're creating artwork. As human beings, we are creative, expressive people. The problem is that we're not linking the quantitative measurements with this qualitative data that is available all the time. So the big question is still, how do we really do this? If we would be able to achieve this, we could even create like a knowing, a sensing system that doesn't need to measure always the past in order to understand if I have achieved my impacts. No, I could create a system that knows here and now where it's going, an immediate feedback, an immediate transparency, and it could probably create something that was mentioned already today, freedom and the democratization of our measurements. Now you might ask, and how would this be realized? Well, we're still at the very beginning. So we've been working with this framework now for over 5 years, and we have several strategic partners. So we've been experimented with this framework in multiple areas, both in the for-profit, in the non-profit, in community engagement, and so on. And usually I don't like to show this data, but because I'm sitting here with many people who pulling out all their metrics on their side, I have to include this site. And what this really shows, this is sort of a community engagement project in Quebec, at the city of Laval. And so as you can see here, so we're measuring the personal, the subjective, the relational, and the organizational impact that this project had over a certain amount of times. And what does it give me? It really gives me data in order to really make visible what the impact really was on the personal, relational, and also on the external level. And there's different ways how this could be visualized. You're all creative. However, I'm looking at this from a creative perspective, and the next layer is really to make this accessible for the commons. And how are we going to do this? Well, we're working right now with a group to create a multi-value accounting app that is both engage the people who are contributing to the data as well as those who are using the data. And we're doing this on a platform that is democratic by nature, on Holo, and working together with a new accounting methodologies, REA, that measures resource, event, and actions. And there's another interesting development. Integrated reporting 3.0, highly recommended for those who are looking into gathering data, defining a new blueprint. And ultimately, it's a future that we really need to design all together. I don't have the answers. I just have a couple of ideas. And together, I think we can make this planet shift and be a place for well-being for all.